basically in the Google Doc, I just have the description that we had to attract people to the program, and I see it's wrong. It was fall 23 to spring 24. It was titled Indigenous Knowledge, Perspectives, and Environmental Justice Across the Curriculum, but it's broader than environmental justice. But its origin is coming out of the Environmental Justice Program and the Teaching Learning Center. And actually, I'm going to forgo all the description because it will be coming out of the different quotes and excerpts. You get a flavor of the value of bringing in indigenous knowledge perspectives into the curriculum. And the speakers from Bemidji State University of Minnesota organized a 3-day workshop on Earth as Relative, and that was kind of the inspiration of doing this. And we have 2 speakers from that workshop. So I think without going saying anything further, I'm going to start with the first clip. So I guess I'll do the share screen thing.
Paul, did you do the land acknowledgement?
Oh, yes. The thing that always throws me off is when you start something a few minutes before. So the land acknowledgement is very important. There's different viewpoints on it. It's in one of the recordings, some of the pros and cons and some direction on it. We are broadcasting from John Jay College, which is an island of Mannahatta, which means island of small hills of the Lenape people. And the Lenape people were stewards of this land for thousands of years, and they were displaced by the process of colonialization, forcibly displaced. They still exist as with continuity, cultural continuity, language continuity, just across the Hudson River in New Jersey and New York and elsewhere across the country. They're somewhat erased, even in the museum, a Native American museum downtown, when they had an exhibit that included the Lenape Manhattan, there's no indication that they still existed. So we have a long way to go. And it behooves us at John Jay and CUNY to acknowledge the land that we're on and the people. And I guess at the very beginning, I think it's important to point out that this seminar kind of merged and is overlapping with a new collective for Indigenous sovereignty at CUNY. So the seminar, a number of us and the participants, the people presenting today and a couple more people are now part of the curriculum committee and other committees of that collective, and it's emerging. So let us know if you're interested in chat with your email, and we'll contact you about the next events. Okay, so I'm going to jump right in with screen share with the first clip. And so this is University of Minnesota Bemidji State. And what we're starting out here with is, well, I'll let them describe it. That's part of the purpose here today.
And then now we have a program that I know like Awanuka is really heavily involved in and has been teaching in the Indigenous Sustainability Studies program. Awanuka, do you feel comfortable speaking to this one a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess when we're thinking about Nijuwa Kochige, when we're thinking about the 2 different worldviews, right? And Erica had this translated to 2 ways of doing the right thing in the right way. And what we're referring to is thinking about like the Western knowledge of science and the Indigenous environmental knowledge. So combining those in a way that are complementary to one another, and finding this common ground and utilizing all those pieces to approach our work with the environment and like how we engage in environment. So one of the big goals in there is teaching the Indigenous Sustainability Studies program classes. And those classes consist of a variety of classes. I'll just name a few right now. Food sovereignty. So really digging into just what the food system looks like, but also what is sovereignty and how does it relate to the foods and the foods we eat and our relationship with foods, and how did we get to where we are today with our relationship with food. We also have Indigenous environmental knowledge, both a global and local Indigenous lens. We have sustainable communities, which also has the global and local perspective. We have environment, wellness, and sacred connection to place. That one is really great too, because we're tying in the wellness portion of it all. So what does our relationship look like with the environment, and how do we look at wellness, not only in that interdependence view of wellness, but wellness of all things, all aspects in our life, and how does engaging in environment in a respectful, respectful way with the environment, how does that uplift us and make overall wellness for all involved. So it's a really great program. We have majors and minors in this program, and they keep funneling in more and more. People are hearing more about it, so people want to hear this perspective. They know that there's more out there, and they're wanting to connect with the environment, not just Indigenous people. They're people around the world are starting to hear more about the Indigenous perspective, and they want to be more connected to the environment in any capacity. So it's bringing those up. We also have Niju internships, where we have students who find something that they really enjoy, and they want to hone in on some kind of knowledge. So we allow them to go and find experts in the area that they want to learn about, and have them write up something of what kind of internships that they want to do. For example, I know a lot about plants of this region and medicinal purposes, and how to harvest them with the Ojibwe protocols. And one of my students wanted to learn more from me outside of the classroom. So what she did was went to the Niju program and was like, hey, I really want to learn more from Awanukwe outside of the classroom and going out into the field. So I'd like to have an internship with her. So we were able to go out into the field in the summer to do this internship. And I got to show her more intimately what the Ojibwe connection is and relationship is with the plants. So there's different examples like that. So a lot of the students get to just find somebody who has a unique knowledge set and go and learn from them. So I think that's really powerful experience.
Yeah, so just a little bit of a history. And the reason I like to show this slide is because, so this is the Niju Gwaikochegewin program that started in 2017 was when we were writing the grant, and I think the project, yeah, started in 2018. And it was mostly Indigenous led. And I feel like that's really important. So it was mostly Indigenous people like deciding and being a part of making decisions moving forward. So I'm not sure again, I don't know where you guys are at, or if you have access to Indigenous community there, if that are from there. Like I know the Wampanoag, I think, if I'm right, is from that area, but just trying to find people and being part, you know, like supporting and starting to go to events. And I think that'd be like a really good step to take if that hasn't been, you know, if that's not started already. And then this is a slide because a lot of people a lot of people are a little bit confused when we say like Niju, which is that 2 ways of doing the right thing in the right way. So this is, and again, our project focused on science, but that Niju can be any discipline, because there's multiple lenses, right? And we are focusing on an Indigenous lens and then the Western science lens for science. And there's some similarities where they're both like, you know, both of them are kind of observing things, and they're trying to help explain like these complex systems. We've always had trouble with that word Western science. Sometimes people are using the word colonized science, I think is another one I've heard lately, but it's way more than Western. There's a lot of like other thoughts that go into that way of thinking about science, but big one is that Indigenous knowledge is a science. And Western science like tends to be more objective, like it's measuring things, it's way more linear and hierarchical, and usually like trying to kind of be reductionist or reduce things to understand. Whereas Indigenous knowledge is different, it's more holistic, and trying to include a lot of like reciprocity. It's very community based, a lot of spiritual connections, more relational, and tends to be a little bit more subjective than objective. So those are some of the differences that we speak to when we talk about, you know, the 2 lenses. And not that any one is like right or wrong or good or bad, but that it's like important to know those 2 lenses, and to be able to maybe like what Awanukwe does in her class, which is really cool, is like connect them to help understand things and help solve all these really complex environmental problems that we have. Awanukwe, do you want to say anything?
So I'm gonna stop here. And Alejandro, from the new director of the Environmental Justice Studies program, will speak to this issue. And then I'll just make a couple of comments after.
Thank you, Paul. So hi everyone. So my name is Alejandro Garcia Lozano. I'm it's now my 2nd year here at John Jay. I'm in the anthropology department, and as Paul mentioned, I'm now the director of the minor for environmental justice here at John Jay. So this last slide is really wonderful, right? So it allows us to really hone in on this concept of 2-eyed seeing. Niju is the word that our colleagues at Bemidji are using, but apparently there's a lot of sort of analogs to this kind of concept among different Indigenous communities, that sort of recognizes the value of using science and perhaps some of the Western scientific methods, but also Indigenous knowledge and how these can amplify each other. I'm going to keep it brief now, because at the end I kind of have more thoughts on this and some of the critiques of this that have emerged. I feel like there's been a lot of tensions around this, but I like the way Erica described this as 2 ways of seeing the world that are both good, right? Or 2 ways that, you know, 2 ways of doing the right thing the right way. There's another, recently a Mi'kmaq elder, Albert Marshall, you shared some stuff with us, Paul. He described 2-eyed seeing in terms of sort of, he and sort of in dialogue that he was in, described it in terms of responsibilities inherent to being in the world, and the world being shared, right? There being sort of unity in the world despite our pasts, having shared responsibility for planetary health, questions of multiple perspectives as well. I think I'm just going to leave it there, but we're going to kind of get into this a little bit more, especially at the end, because as you can imagine, there's already some tensions. Okay, how do we actually reconcile these very different ways of seeing in the world that have very different historical trajectories? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything now, Paul.
Yeah, I just want to add 2 things. Is the last slide you saw of science is precisely the way I teach climate science, with Indigenous observations and elevating those. As my work in the Arctic, we don't have that many scientific observation stations, but we have many Indigenous people with oral histories going back thousands of years. So to impress upon the students, this information is invaluable. And when we do research in the Arctic, we're required to work with Indigenous people and Indigenous knowledge from the beginning of the design of the research all the way to the end, which should be the way everywhere, but it is not. The second thing I want to mention is they use this as a framework to indigenize the curriculum at Bemidji. So they already had the Indigenous Sustainability Program, major and minors, but they did this across the curriculum. And they got a good 3-year grant to do that with another year extension. So this may be something we can not exactly copy, but it could be an approach we could use at CUNY to get a grant to indigenize the curriculum. And something that also came out with Saucy, we don't have a clip on that, I don't think, but she pointed out that indigenizing is different than decolonizing, and we'll draw more out of that. Okay, so I'm gonna go on to the next clip now. And now we're moving to Rebecca Saucy. And LaDawn, I was actually thinking of running this all the way through, but I can stop it at 31.
No,
I'll
it's
pause.
fine. It's
Okay,
fine.
okay, good.
In Hawaii, that their ethic and their language, aloha aina, is truly, the literal translation is the love of the land. And Professor John Osorio, who was the director of Hawaiian Studies and is Native Hawaiian, he actually has a beautiful account of that, which is really, it gives you the concept of aloha aina. He says combines an ecological, spiritual, and cultural understanding of the relationship of the people to the land. And that could have a political aspect. It certainly did in terms of the Kingdom of Hawaii. That was their land. But that spiritual aspect of it is what attaches each generation to the land and to each other. So when we talk about intergenerational equity in place, it is that obligation to ensure that the next generation has that same relationship, that is honored and respected. So it's a different moral conversation than the idea of the rights of future generations, which I've been to philosophy conferences where, you know, people say, well, can future generations really have rights? And da, 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 da. It's not that conversation. This is the obligation. This is the duty. So it's not contested. It's part of that ethic of place. So in the context of territory, it's a composite of land and waters, and the expression of this is as though it's a human body, that the water, for example, is the bloodline, the veins, the rivers, the tributaries. The body is the land. And to be embodied in life requires the synergy of land and water. It also is inclusive of air. And so many of the tribal leaders that were there, and they had cultural leaders, they had their conservation leaders, some of the political leaders were there. But in terms of what that looks like, nobody would think of separating out the water from the land. Like the body couldn't live without the veins, without the, so that idea, and this, of course, in the land of the Colorado River in a time of drought, the health of the river is in jeopardy. What happens to the land if the river dies? Now, I'm using.
So I'm just pausing here to skip ahead to continue nature's body metaphor.
So again, the idea here is to illustrate that if you're, look at your body, you want a whole body where all of your organs are functioning. That is what it means to live and live well. It is the same with the earth body and these various systems. So that is an example of the way that Indigenous knowledge / epistemology, multiplicity, can come together around an understanding and then be used to critique the policies, either whether those are federal, state, or even tribal, in terms of their impact on environmental justice, and climate justice. And if we look at earth justice as a composite of that, that's what we're talking about here. The idea of a spiritual relationship of the people to the land, I think, is very important. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but that is part of what Professor Osorio constructed in terms of the ethic that he was talking about in Hawaii. In international human rights law, there is Article 25 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that says Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain and strengthen their distinctive spiritual relationship with their traditionally owned or otherwise occupied and used lands, territories, waters, coastal seas, and other resources. And the final clause is, and to uphold their responsibilities to future generations in this regard. So that is what I'll be building this afternoon as we talk about this idea of environmental citizenship, place-based citizenship. But to me, what that means is that on a human rights level, we must honor the relationship of the Indigenous people to their land, whether they are still located on those lands or whether they have been removed from the land. And that is why that whole idea of acknowledging and recognition of Indigenous peoples and places is so very important, because as you see in New York, I'm sure, to many people that come and visit your state, they may not see the Lenape people. They may not know about them. They may not have any idea what their relationship was or what the land's character is under that way of being. And so wherever.
So I'm pausing there. And so a lot to unpack there, but I'm gonna stop share and LaDawn. So LaDawn Haglund, I haven't introduced you yet, is director of an emerging climate environmental justice research center, and also teaches in the EGS program and the Law and Society in Political Science.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, you're right. There was a lot to unpack, and Professor Sosi's few words that we shared, we actually brought her in for 2 hours of conversation. And so if we were to watch the whole thing, we were all like, oh my gosh, there's so much here. So we just tried to pick out a few key things that are relevant to today's theme of faculty development and what is our role in this. And these are the clips that really struck me as different than what I was trained to do, let's say. So, you know, we go through our education, get our PhDs, and we do our research and we do our teaching, and there's very specific ways that we're taught how to do that. And it's very rarely that we're actually taught how to connect to the place or to the places even that we're doing research in, or that we're teaching our students about, or that we're traveling to, or that we currently live in. And so I really like this idea of having to seek ways of connecting. And as somebody who does law and society work, the implications for how I understand international law, the ways that I understand research, were very strong for me. So I just want to say 2 things and then open it up later at the end for any kind of conversation that emerges from this. But I felt like one of the things in particular, what does this idea of being connected to the land in very deep ways, the way that the blood that flows through our bodies is connected to our life. How do we study water, for example, in this way? Understanding the rivers to be part of that body of this ecology that we're living in. And one of the things is exactly to disrupt the idea that you can specialize in just studying water and not understand it in the context of the rest. So I think back, so I have training in sort of political economy. And if you just think about the way economists look at a water body or a forest or other types of elements of the earth body, there's often an understanding of what resource it provides or how it serves a purpose for users. And it's a very fragmented way of understanding how what this world is that we live in. It doesn't have a spiritual dimension. It doesn't have an important connection with our narratives and stories and histories and ancestors the way it does in an indigenous worldview. And this is not only with the indigenous worldview. There's a scholar called Karl Polanyi that maybe some of you are familiar with, who strongly criticizes an economic way of thinking that separates the economy from society, as if you can have these neutral economic processes that are disconnected from the societal impact, whether it's labor or natural, the natural world, etc. And I think Polanyi is starting down the road that we would get to, if we kept going, we would get to indigenous ways of thinking. So Polanyi says you can't separate economy from politics and society because there are winners and losers. There are things at stake. Indigenous thinking goes further to say you can't even think of it in this way. You have to consider this earth body as a whole. What does that actually mean when you're on the ground? So Professor Sosi said a couple of things that I thought were really interesting. One is intergenerational equity becomes a different conversation. It's not about these individuals in the future who have a right to the things that we have, because that just pits it as if we're against them somehow. But it's what is our obligation to leave a world that is still a body intact, a world that is not poisoned. And that is a very different conversation. And I love how Dr. Sosi points out the ways that the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People actually attempts to embody that way of thinking in ways that are very different from the rest of the international law canon. So that was one thing. So as I'm doing my work in law and society, I'm thinking about what are ways of thinking about the rights of nature is a very problematic framing, because again, it's like as if we are against nature, but that's not exactly what's happening. Not to say that there's not value in a tree having standing, for example. This is a conversation in law and society. Do trees have standing in court? Well, yeah, that's an important question on some level, but it's not grasping this bigger sense of obligation. And then finally, I'll say, what about in the classroom? What does this mean with engaging with students? I'm a Buddhist meditation instructor, and I draw from, in my practice, traditional Tibetan practices, which are very similar in ways that probably won't surprise most of the people in this room, to Native American and other kinds of indigenous ways of engaging with the world. And some of the practices that I try to bring into the classroom are closing your eyes, contemplating where your body is on this earth, contemplating where what you ate this morning came from, contemplating what that might mean for what you're about to study or what you read last week, and really guiding students through. You don't have to be a meditation instructor to do this. You just have to be a teacher. Help them to go on that journey, give them permission to go into that spiritual and connected space instead of always forcing them into their heads. So those are just a few things. there's one last thing, and this is brief. At the end there, you hear Dr. Sosi encouraging us to also educate others who aren't necessarily in our classrooms or in our research spaces about the lands we live on, and that people are still here. So very much the beautiful land acknowledgement that Paul gave at the beginning. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, LaDawn. We'll go on to the next. Oh, I'd like to mention, we did have Chief DeGroat from the Lenape Munsee Ramapo tribe across the river, was our first speaker. But unfortunately, our tech was not very good. And I'll try to find a way to clean up the audio at some point and make that available. And all these videos will be made available to the people coming here in their entirety. So we do have permission to share in faculty development, but not at the public at large at this point, all the videos. Okay, so share screen again. And
So critical epistemologies are really intriguing to me. The step 3, that is intriguing to me because I feel like we need a way to transform our existing knowledge systems. I don't think you can go from step 1, the traditional disciplines in higher ed, to step 3, the critical alternatives. I don't think you can get from 1 to 3 without stopping at 2. And I don't think you should stop at 2. I think you should plow on into step 3 and really critique that. So what I'm interested in my own work is how do we transform knowledge systems? And I look at that on 3 levels. On the level of values, what values are embedded in the knowledge system? What are the goals that we have? So we're in a public university at University of Arizona. What are our goals about educating the students that we have and bringing our faculty together? And what are our available structures to do that? And that's why the step 2 is important, because if you've built transdisciplinary structures that are strong and coherent, you have a better chance of transformation than if your structures are very ephemeral. And in my view, and this is just my view, many of the traditional American Indian studies programs in the United States, they did not go into a frame that is strong. And therefore, under this kind of anti-DEI, let's get rid of anything that looks alien, they're in big jeopardy. They're not getting built. They're not getting considered. And so it's very important to me to think about that idea of what structures do we want for the future and how do we want to build those? Okay, that, by the way, was my introduction. And now I'm going to give a kind of a substantive view of how that might look in terms of the environmental issues. But before I get there,
okay, so now we introduce Bibi Cadleraro, which is perfect because Bibi is in the interdisciplinary studies program, which is exactly what Professor Sosi was talking about, and Jerry Markowitz, who's very important in that program.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to this room. Yeah, for me, what Dr. Sosi is saying there is very short, but there's so much condensed there in terms of the politics of knowledge and politics with big capital letters and politics connected to the places where we work. So in the smaller range of everyday politics, how to transform epistemologies. And I think she mentions, she mentions values, goals, and available structures. So I think the connections to how we live in place and how each one of us as persons, parts of democracies, let's put it that way. How do we connect with our with the places that feed us, the places that feed us in terms of food, but also in terms of spiritual connections, right? And how do we transform or become role models for our students in terms of that way of living? So basically what she's doing, she's connecting ways of living, like the ontologies of being, right? How do we live in place, with the epistemologies? How do we know the places that we live with and by and for? And that connection is super important as we become teachers of transformation or agents of transformation in institutions of higher education. I feel like the ways that we role model those transformations as we ourselves transform ourselves in the ways that we connect are super important. And I think there are minute gestures that we can bring into our syllabi, into the ways that we connect with students, into the pedagogies that we choose to bring into our classrooms, as Professor Haglund was mentioning, bringing in contemplation into our classrooms, for example, and allowing the students to reconnect with how they are living and how that connects with how they know the world or how they feel about certain things and how that might interfere or allow more openings into knowledge, and how that in and of itself is making or opening students to becoming agentic in their daily lives. I think also bringing that what Dr. Tsotsi is saying about available structures in higher education, and today's earlier talk about learning and how learning is somewhat becoming uncomfortable with not knowing, with becoming closer, becoming connected to others that we might not know their ways of being. Others meaning people, students, faculty, staff, but also trees and the river that we have 2 blocks away. And just like connecting to that and making that part of the robustness of becoming transdisciplinary, because I feel like really the way that we might transform the Western paradigm is by connecting to that strangeness, right? To the strangeness of the other, and allowing ourselves to be uncomfortable with that. So there's a lot of learning and unlearning that needs to happen, but as long as we don't allow us to become uncomfortable with that, we won't make that transformation happen. So I think transdisciplinarity is about that becoming uncomfortable with the unknown. I leave it at that.
Thank you, BB, and thank you to the ISP program to invite me to co-teach with you this semester. I'm really looking forward to that. I feel like I'm kind of landed in a home in some way. I just want to put out a quick footnote, and for something for us to follow up later with a webinar, is Erica Bailey Johnson from Bemidji did a workshop on relational ontology and epistemology, because we are talking about epistemological justice, the genocide of knowledge, which happened in a very concrete way, putting people in residence schools, et cetera, and taking away the language. So something for us to follow up on, maybe on an Indigenous Day. So I have one more clip, and let's see. And this was in response to a question that Alejandro asked of Professor Sassi.
So if you were gonna do an inventory, say you're in your group, you're thinking, we're all coming together and we wanna do something. So the inventory for me in a public university setting like that is to say, step one, how are the traditional Western European derived disciplines of knowledge, anthropology, English, political science, math, physics, chemistry, how are those represented on our campus? Are they in their traditional frame? Have we done something different with that? What do they look like, and how dominant are they in terms of who we hire, how we tenure people, how we promote people, what we count as real research, what counts as scholarship, blah, blah, blah. That's step one. Step two is how we stepped into transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary frames. Your group coming together says, yes, ASU School of Sustainability exists, says yes. So the inventory of that is step two. What have we already done? That's bringing together knowledge, looking at knowledge in different ways, assembling a different structure for students. Is it successful? What does that look like? And step three is that step of critical epistemologies, critical theories, critical views of this mission that we call higher education, where it fits. How are we doing that? Do we have different knowledges represented? Or are we taking this on faith because the disciplines are still so dominant in those knowledge frameworks? And so that I'm suggesting is step three, which many people are doing in their own personal scholarship. Some people try to do it at their university and just are not successful. And some people are at a university, thank goodness, that recognizes and rewards that effort. Does that help? Okay, great.
Okay, so this one is for Ale.
Thank you, Paul. And I think, you know, that connects really well with what Vivi was talking about, these sort of like these structural things, and with the previous clip. So just for a little bit of like broader, you know, makes me think a little bit more broadly, right? So in recent years, there's been quite a bit of interest and responsiveness, often among white Western settler scholars and practitioners at nonprofits, for example, to try to incorporate Indigenous perspectives into the work that we do, right? To acknowledge the violence against Indigenous people that underpins all of our civilizations. And with that, there's been an openness to certain texts and dialogues that sort of promise us reconciliation, that promise a way to bridge and to reconcile different ways of knowing and understanding the world. Hence the popularity of books like Braiding Sweetgrass, which builds on Indigenous ideas of reconciliation, right? Combining Western ways of knowing. So this links to our very early sort of clip we watched around two-eyed seeing. Other ways of describing this are things like a wampum belt, a two-row wampum belt, right? There's a Maori concept called waka taurua, which is a double canoe, right? So I'll come back to that in a moment. So there's similar ones, right? And critical Indigenous scholars have questioned these reconciliatory approaches, if not in their totality or in theory, just more how they're being operationalized. So for example, Dr. Zoe Todd, who's a Métis scholar in Canada, in so-called Canada, she critiques the Canadian government's adoption of these reconciliatory framings and of braiding, right, in their policy, while simultaneously suppressing Indigenous environmental defenders and things like that, right? And she talks about this in really provocative Twitter threads, which I'd be happy to share. And she reminds us sort of the violence linked to our disciplines, science, but also the other ones, right, that have been used as tools of empire and colonization at some point or still, right? Geography comes to mind, right? Surveying the land for empire and for conquering. In her critiques, Dr. Todd is also challenging this idea that we can simply tack on indigenous thinking, right? That if we just include the right voices, then our work will be decolonization. We see this a lot in sort of natural resource management, which is my area of expertise, and also Zoe Todd's also these fisheries, fish-human relationalities. It's clear that we have evidence, right, that applying two-eyed seeing in research and teaching can really amplify and strengthen both the scientific and the indigenous ways of knowing, and can be productively linked to changes in stewardship and management that respect our responsibilities to the earth. There are examples I'd be happy to discuss at some other time or share more stuff. But I think, what Dr. Zoe Todd and what Dr. Sosi are pointing us to, maybe in different tones, right? Because Dr. Todd is kind of really adversarial in this, is that we need to go simply beyond including the indigenous in a superficial way, just inserting it into the jargon du jour, whether it's equity, DEI, inclusion, which Dr. Sosi touches on. And it's even beyond interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary, but how do we transform our educational systems and our pedagogical framings? And we've talked a little bit about the challenges, what that means, right? This question of what's available, what structures are available. And as Bibi said, we kind of have to stay with like that trouble and that discomfort, to borrow some words from Donna Haraway. But we've learned some stuff from our colleagues at Bemidji, right? So it's about experiential learning. It's about actually taking students there, connecting them with these multiple things. It's about maybe using indigenous language, incorporating storytelling, teaching the scientific method alongside these other ones. And so I think we're left with a lot more questions to resolve than answers, I think, at the end of the day. Right, but we can talk a little bit more, and I think we've highlighted some of these things, right? So relationality, centering the relationships to the land and to collectives rather than individuals and private property. So as LaDawn was saying, like when we teach things about rights, maybe we don't just focus on rights, right? We talk about responsibilities when we teach about the law. So all of these things can be part of it. And yeah, I think we're left with this question, right? It's not perfect, and we likely can't integrate or braid our different worldviews. And maybe the Maori concept of the two canoes is a really useful one, because it's about tying canoes together temporarily, right? So the canoes represent these different knowledge systems, and we tie them temporarily for a particular goal that we might want to achieve. And maybe integration is not what we want to do, but that's just sort of maybe something that hopefully is food for thought. So yeah, let's maybe open it up for discussion, and thank you all for coming and joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. So please put questions or comments in chat, or just unmute and speak up. Maybe somebody could say why they came to our session and what ideas they may have to indigenize the curriculum and the value of doing that.
While folks are gathering their thoughts, I could just say one thing, which is that one of the things that stood out to me in Dr. Sosi's last comment that we haven't really emphasized is the reward structures of the university for promotion and all the stuff that we have to do for our jobs. It's not indigenized, let's just say. So that's a real structural problem. Jerry, I saw that you unmuted.
Yeah, I just following up on that, in terms of indigenizing the curriculum, across the curriculum, how has that been done in other places? And is there a model of how we can try to do that at John Jay?
Could I just briefly say sort of like what Dr. Sosi said in her talk about this, and then others? I know, Paul, you probably have more info on this from like our colleagues in Bemidji who have tried to do this, but she was trying to make Dr. Rebecca Sosi was trying to make this distinction between decolonizing, which is this broader sort of structural thing, and indigenizing. And she was really talking about public universities in one of the comments she made, and about land grant universities. So I think there are ways that indigenizing is compatible with some of the work that we already do, right? That's community engaged, that maybe co-produces knowledge with communities, respects the agency of communities to help us produce science that is good. But she talks a little bit about sort of creating knowledge that respects sort of the like, you know, the knowledge systems of the people that were here first and sort of the obligations we have to them, so that our knowledge is actually useful to the people who are part of this land that we inhabit. And she was talking about sort of land grant universities. So she says it's not a land acknowledgement, right? It's like, it's actually doing the heavy lifting to support the people and knowledges that existed here where our university is now. And yeah, that's not super easy, right? But perhaps the program in Bemidji like is one example of like a more concrete, like these are ways in which they did it. Yeah, if you want to add, Paul.
Yeah, so the Collective for Indigenous Sovereignty at CUNY, they've been meeting for about 2-3 years under different auspices. And now they're becoming more self-organizing going forward. And they have proposals to have an Indigenous center at CUNY that's open to non-Indigenous too, and hiring, to promote hiring of people with Indigenous background. I was at the Indigenous Environmental Network conference Protecting Mother Earth in West North Carolina on the East Band of Cherokee land for a week, and it was a lot of it was 90% Native American, and they're all indigenizing their universities, and they're making a lot of progress. They come from every discipline, I think, as far as I know, and so a lot of it's a process, and I think we do have to, it'd be useful for us to make this more of a solid network on the curriculum and education aspect. For instance, I met some people that are doing research fellowships and with Indigenous people. I think there's a lot we can do that would be a process that would be building it up, but also having this vision. But what I was so amazed with that, in a previous week I spent with the Lakota and the Black Hills with the Zen peacemakers bearing witness, not knowing bearing witness, is how many layers to this is. This is a lot more deep than I ever imagined, what Indigenous knowledge is, culture, and this oral history that's been coming down. So I think it's going to take a lot of process for this start being articulated. So there's a huge role for the humanities. Francisco Delgado is one of the main people in the collective, and he's from the humanities, and he opens up his teaching in English with the origin myth, and braiding sweetgrass also starts that out with Sky Woman, and so does the Ojibwa. So it's so yeah, I think there's a lot to do. Somebody else maybe. So hopefully this is going to be just the beginning of this kind of conversation at CUNY. So we're open to ideas of how to facilitate that.
Well, I was just looking at my notes from the Rebecca Sosi conversation. So while others maybe think of other questions, one other thing she said was the importance of sort of place-based research and those place-based connections as part of indigenizing, and that's an interesting thread to continue. Maybe I don't know if you all recall those comments she made, and sort of.
Yeah,
I want to leave space for Patricia and Joseph and Farah if you have any. We only have 1 more minute, so.
Sorry, so I can say something that I did in the past. I had several presentations. I invited Indigenous people to come here we have one program that was very successful, Native Sky Watchers, and Annette Lee, an astrophysicist. They gave us a wonderful talk about Indigenous ways of looking at the sky. And then I had like 3 different programs. I organized these things together with the Graduate Center, and they were very successful, but we didn't have, I was expecting like more students to come and to get more interested. So I think we should find ways of enhancing, bringing more attention to students, even though I tried very hard. that was one of the problems that we had here. So I think if they see more constantly the presence of Indigenous people, Indigenous programs. So I don't know what has been organized for October at John Jay, because sometimes there is very little in terms of exposure, in terms of different ideas, programs, and things related to Indigenous people or Native Americans. So I think we should come out with some ideas, something to present in October, which is approaching very fast. Yeah.
Joseph, can you say something quickly, and we should follow up
Sure.
with Patricia.
Sure. I'm so sorry. I'm on campus today with my son, and he's been listening intently. It's a lot of the work that I do with the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond. For many years, we've done Undoing Racism and Community Organizing workshops in partnership with Native communities as well. John Moran, one of the trainers for the Institute, is usually a thought partner for me in how to bring not only indigeneity and decolonization, but really affirming other ways of thinking about knowledge and being in relationship into the classroom. And one of the activities that we do that really tries to connect dots at different times is this activity we do in the workshop is called "What Do You Like About Being?" And we talk about the different racialized groups that people are racialized to in our society. And in that conversation, when we talk about what do you like about being if you've been racialized as white, what do you like about being if you've been racialized as Black, it really allows us to have a conversation around identities and their relationship to power, but also the invisibilization or the erasure of Native people, right? So there's different content that I bring up in the classroom. The reason why I came to this conversation because I wanted to see what folks in my community here at John Jay were doing to bring this consciousness into the learning process. So I'm really grateful that you're doing the work, and I look forward to being part of it in the future as well. Thank you.
So if I may say something real quick, is that we got a lot of money from John Jay, from the Graduate Center for all of these programs. So I don't know how's the budget situation right now in terms of providing funds for any of these programs, but we also got money from John Jay to repeat this program in Colombia. Which, you know, I've been working there with Indigenous peoples for a very long time. So they supported us. So I think it's just a matter of presenting the proposals and I think John Jay is very open to these initiatives.
Patricia, do you mean Colombia, Palenque de Basilio, Colombia?
Well, I've been there also, but I'm talking about in particular to the indigenous people that I work with. I have worked in the past in Colombia, but I also worked with African communities in Colombia in the Pacific and in the Colombian coast in the north. Yeah, which Palenque, San Basilio is a very, very interesting place.
Very interesting.
Yes,
we
in
could talk
terms of
about
music, language.
Yeah. No, I said I would love to talk to you. My mom is from Cincelejo.
Oh, nice. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Tierra de hacha y machete. That's where my mother's from.
Yeah, right. Hardworking people with their machetes.
That's right.
Yes,
That's right.
Work in the land. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you.